Hi, Gabriella. It is great to have you on here today.
Thank you so much, Jill. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm really excited to get into it because I believe this is a topic people need a lot of help with. And I feel like you have just such a great everyday approach to it that people can understand. So I'm really, really excited to have you here. So before we dig in, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
So I'm from Canada, but North America as well. I'm an interior designer. I'm a project manager. I've been doing this for over 15 years at this point. I have a lot of real life experience in terms of like in the trenches of building and designing and really understanding how all of that fits together, which has really kind of created that whole, I guess, joint venture in my business of the planning and the design portion and how it all comes together.
Yeah, and I mean, I mentioned what I did in the beginning because so often I see people, and especially now with people who've bought new homes, they're remodeling, they're renovating, and like you'll see just on Facebook community pages
Mhm.
nightmares about people who've had a nightmare contractor, or how do I even do this? Or I mean, I'll get calls, I'm going to buy the house, do I do it now? Do I wait? I mean, there's a million things people are just so, you know, um, by. But let's start with one of the big things, which I think is a great message you have, especially at those early stages of designing, and that is
Mhm.
how do we create a home that's intentional? And you use the word intentional, and I think that's important. So let's have you describe that and talk about that a little.
So the biggest thing that I find is that a lot of people rush into the design and the renovation phase. And I get it. It's the exciting portion. It's what me and you love doing, which is creating those mood boards, creating those visions and really bringing it all together. But if we don't first understand what it is that we're trying to do and who and why we're trying to do it, we're designing purely for aesthetics and also
Mhm.
just purely for this drive of either trying to appease a certain person or for the likes or for the posts or whatever it might be. And social media has very much changed the aspect of design in that sense, where a lot of what we're doing these days is to create spaces that are post worthy. And while they
Yeah.
may be beautiful and you can pin them and you can post them and there's a lot of posts I think that come out now where it's like the what you see, what the reality is, and there's all this junk and all this mess over to the side. So it's how can we actually create that space that is more intentionally thought through while we're in the design phase that not only checks off that box of being aesthetic, but actually works for you in the long run. So you're not dealing with those issues later on down the road.
Right. So things like function and lifestyle, right, are things that you have to really be honest with yourself about. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
one of the biggest things I took away from my design degree, and I had a great mentor who was a professor in that program, but one of the biggest messages was you could design a space that looks gorgeous, right? It's in a magazine, it looks beautiful. But if it doesn't work for your client,
Mm-hmm.
it's an absolute failure. And the biggest thing I learned in design school is we would always start with the room with, okay, what does the client need and want? How do they live? And I always
Exactly.
start a project, whether we're just decorating or renovating, with those questions. So you
Mm-hmm.
are right. And especially with remodeling, it's really critical because there's a lot of permanent, um, changes you're making. Um,
Features, materials, structural, all of
right.
those things, right?
If
Yeah.
you're opening a space or not, if you're moving plumbing, whatever. So, yeah, I think to just start and tell the audience, like, before you get into like getting swept away, and we're going to talk about Pinterest and other things, really, really like be honest with yourself about how does my family live? How am I the most comfortable? And how does this space need to function? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Subsequent to that, the other thing that kind of ties into that you talk about is strategy versus vision for a
Yes.
renovation. So let's talk about that too.
So vision is easy. Vision is what you physically see. And this is where I guess it gets a little muddled and confusing, is that they
Mm,
go hand in hand. But
yeah.
if we only focus on the vision right from the beginning and we dive deep into Instagram and we dive deep into inspiration images and Pinterest and even watching, HDTV and getting all of those creative juices flowing,
Yeah.
we're still only looking at the visual and the tactile. And what often ends up happening, and I see it more and more these days, is that you're creating a space that is very generic. It is
Mm.
appeasing to the masses. It is what is considered not necessarily trendy, but there are a lot of trends and a lot of styles that people pick up on, and then they only design in that certain way. But it's
Right.
also, it's like basically the thought process from fashion of like a beige cardigan. It goes with anything, right?
Right.
You're trying to be non-offensive. You're creating spaces that are just very monochromatic. They're very unoffensive in any way, shape, or form. So you're lacking
Right.
your character, you're lacking your individuality. And that
Mhm.
comes down to one, really understanding what you are from a style perspective and what you're looking for, but then also that strategization portion. So,
Yeah.
in everything that I talk to with my clients, as well as with what I teach, it's really diving into the beginning process of understanding, like you talked about, what you're wanting that space to be.
Yeah.
Because with me and you, if we're working with a client and say we do the exact same room and it's a 10 by 12 and we're
Mhm.
working with 3 different clients,
Mhm.
those 3 different clients are going to have 3 different needs
Yeah.
for what that space needs to hold. So the solutions that we would come up with those spaces are going to differ. And then you add that layer of that style and that vision and that creativity in terms of the color palette, the textures, the flow. But you
Right.
first really need to understand what they're looking for. And we understand that process because it's called programming. But if
Right.
you're not taught that, then it's like, how do you move forward in that process on your own?
Right.
And really, the way that I teach it is sitting in a space. If you're working in an existing environment, sit in
Yep.
that space and really analyze what's working, what's not working. Think about
Mhm.
how you enter, think about
Mhm.
heat, think about light, think about
Mhm.
airflow, think about watch how people interact in the space. Because, for instance, I redid my entry a while ago. If I had just redone my entry for how I wanted it to work and how I thought it should visually be,
Yeah.
without factoring in my husband and how he utilizes the space and where he puts his shoes and what his natural tendency and factors are, it
Yep.
never would have worked, because I would have designed it for a solution being like, this is how it's going to work, and
Yep.
trying to impose a solution on him as opposed to bringing him into the conversation. So if you
It's such
have multiple people, kids, pets, partners, bring them into the conversation and even just watch how they use the space, because that will inform you in terms of what solutions you're trying to come up with.
it's such a good point, and you mentioned an entryway, so it reminded me years ago I had in my entryway, like a table, it had some
Mhm,
drawers, and I had a lamp on it and maybe like a decorative item, and it was really pretty, and the drawers, um, were were good in that it gave me some storage,
mhm.
but years ago, I'm like, "Everyone's dropping their shoes and stuff here, it's near the coat closet, whatever," and I replaced it with a low bench. It gave people a place to sit, it gave us a place to, like, drop a tote bag, and then under the bench, I put a basket for everybody, for their shoes or belongings they were dropping there so I could stow them away really quickly, and not only I actually think it looks prettier now anyway, but
Mhm.
it's so much more functional, and had I just asked myself in the beginning instead of just setting that up whatever
Yeah,
and said, and so you do have to live in a space sometimes for a bit too to figure that out, but
definitely.
I think that to get the right vision for you, do the strategy part, because if you skip the
Yes.
strategy part, the vision won't match up with the way you live, and it's really important, right?
And then, I mean, if you're not renovating, say you're building new, you
Yeah.
can do the same process, because it's either you're working with an architect and an interior designer and then a contractor on the side, and they're
Yep.
designing the space and then the contractor's building it, or
Yep.
you're working with a design build firm, which is doing both. In either situation, you should be having those conversations with them in terms of what space you're looking for, why you need the space to work a certain way, and the relationships between the rooms. So instead of going, I want it to be, a farmhouse style house with open plan and all of these different adjacencies, instead really ask yourself, how do you live? And how do you want to be living that's not currently working in your existing space? And in your existing space, what is, that thing that makes your eye twitch? For me, it's always my entry. And I think most women it is, because they're drop zones. So
Yeah.
how do you make that drop zone work for you? And if you're designing that drop zone into a new space, I know a lot of new designs, this way with houses, is that they're just these big open foyers. And it's like,
Yes.
okay, well, practically, how does that work? where if that's your main point of entry for your entire family, how is that going to work for you? And
Right.
if that is just one big open foyer and guest comes in, do guests know how they are meant to interact with that space? Do they know where their
Mhm.
shoes are supposed to go? Do they know where their coats are supposed to go? Or are
Mhm.
they going to come into this big grand foyer and just kind of stand there and be like, where do you want me to put my shoes?
Right.
Right. So it's like
Yep.
it's working through it from sometimes multiple lenses and multiple angles to understand and to ask those questions of, is this intentional, and is this very easy to understand what I'm
Yeah.
supposed to do and where I would drop certain things and how I would interact in that room, because design in the end is meant to facilitate your life, not
Yeah.
just being an aesthetic feature.
Definitely. Okay. So we've touched on this a little, and you talk about kind of why Pinterest isn't always a good thing. And we've touched on it a little, but let's get
Mhm.
into that a little bit, because I call it like the black hole of Pinterest. Like you can fall down the black hole, and for people who aren't designers, it can, I mean, even if you are a designer, it could get overwhelming if you don't really
Yep.
know how to sift through it. But you definitely can get lost in that. And then you hit this point of like, okay, now I've seen so many things. What do I do? So
Mhm.
I'd love your take on Pinterest, because it's a great tool. But like
Yes,
anything else, you have to know how to use a tool correctly for it to be a benefit. So I'd love your
definitely.
take on Pinterest. Yeah.
So, I mean, to preface this, I'm on Pinterest one from my business and I post things on it as well as I utilize it in my business. So, I'm not saying don't use it. I'm saying
Right.
understand how to use it effectively. And there's
Right.
two things you need to understand with Pinterest. One, it is a social media platform and it has an algorithm. So, it is basing what it provides to you as search results based on your previous history. So, not everything that is available on Pinterest in terms of what's posted on there from images will show up in your feed based upon how you search it and what specifics you're putting into it. So, that's the first thing that
Mhm.
you need to understand. So, if you just put in, like, okay, for me, I'm pregnant right now, so I've been in the world of nurseries forever. So, if you plug in baby nursery, what it
Yeah.
automatically shows up for you, if you're not hyper specific in what you're searching for, is going to be different for you than what it's going to show up for someone else, because it's catering to your specific previous search results. So
Got
that's
it.
the one thing to understand. The other is that a lot of what is posted on Pinterest from even interior designers and just generically posted are incorrectly labeled. So if you're specifically looking for, say, a traditional kitchen,
Yep.
not everything that is labeled as a traditional kitchen is actually labeled properly. So you're
Yeah.
going to come up with a mixed boat of images, and you
Okay.
might fall in love with certain images and characteristics that you think are traditional that aren't. And depending if you're working with someone and then you provide them all these images as stating, this is what I want my kitchen to look like, and I want it to
Yeah.
be traditional, and it conflicts with what actually traditional is, there's
Yeah.
going to be mixed messaging there in terms of what you're actually looking for.
Those are
So,
good points. Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, really, it's the same as like searching in Google. The more specific you can be, and you can, I don't know all the little individual hyperlinks and little like asterisks and stuff to put in there to be more specific in Google, but it
Right.
is a search engine. So
Yeah.
the more specific you can be in terms of what you're looking for, and I'm talking about like features, not style
Mhm.
terms, the more specific will pop up for you. So this is where again it pops into the strategy point, is rather than looking at it as you're wanting, say, a boho chic living room, and then you
Right.
put in boho chic living room, and whatever pops up that's been characterized as that comes up in your feed.
Yep.
Instead, use it as a, what does boho chic mean for you, and what type of environment and aesthetic as well as emotional qualities are you looking for that space to hold? So
Mhm.
is it tactile? Does it have a lot of textures? Is it
Mhm.
have certain colors to it?
Mhm.
Is it warm? Is it inviting? Really go through all of those different adjectives and then use those to help you distinguish and to search terms in Pinterest, and you will come up with a lot more availability.
Yeah, and as you're talking, the whole time you're talking, I'm thinking AI, AI, because if you don't talk to AI correctly, and that's coming up soon where people are going to definitely be using it for their home design, but if you don't know the language to use,
Exactly.
and like you said, there's a database it's scanning, it's
Mhm.
just pulling, and it may pull things that are mislabeled, and you've got to get at least for now, and it's going to get better, but I think you've got to get very specific. It's not so nuanced. And I think it's interesting to think about. We don't always think about Pinterest and Google that way, but you're so correct. And I think also just it's easy to get lost in so many images that people then
Yes.
hit a wall of confusion, which then they're like, oh God, now what do I do? So yeah,
Mhm.
it can be good, but it can be bad.
Well, and then the reason I brought baby nurseries is because I did a workshop previously, and I have a limited podcast series coming out on how to design a baby nursery.
Yeah,
And when I was going through Pinterest, every time I just did a generic search term of like baby nursery,
yeah,
literally all the exact same images would pop up, as well as all the
interesting.
exact same styles. So if I'm looking for something that's different, or
Yeah,
I'm not a designer and I'm like, oh, well, clearly this is the only option available for me to do for a nursery. Therefore, this is what I should be doing for a nursery, is
right.
giving you conflicting information. So instead, it's looking at what you're trying to do in that space and then using that to inform what you're searching. So rather
Yeah.
than using the specific nursery term,
Hmm.
start using different language and different words to pull up different options for you in images that might not be nurseries, but they can
Yeah,
be design inspiration to fuel for you what options you could do in a space. You could pick up
yeah,
living room images, you could pick up kitchens, you could pick up entries. It's
right.
less about the room, it's more about what features are on those photos that you go, oh, I really like how they did that wall accent. I really like
Yeah.
how they brought that color in and they pair those items together. That gives you that creative flow and that inspiration that you can go, I would like to do this in this room.
Right, I can apply it to my project or
Exactly.
my space. Yeah, that's such a great point. I really think that's great. Um,
It is looking differently at it though. So I mean, a lot of the time when people are searching images, they're looking for literally an image that then they
no,
can just
totally,
recreate. Right. So it
totally.
does involve a lot more piecing a couple images together and layering it and then
Yes.
understanding how you're going to apply that into your own room.
Which, leads me to when it comes to using language of finding things and honing in on what you want, to me, that's where a professional can really help you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I want to talk about whether it be interior design or renovation. Maybe because of HGTV, maybe because of social media, maybe because of a lot of mindset issues with, hiring people. People tend to feel like, "I can just do this on my own,"
Mm-hmm.
and they run and so and in some cases, maybe they can. But I really wanna talk about when you're doing renovations or remodeling, what you know, do you have a team? Who's on that team? How big is the team? And it could vary per client. So, let's talk about even when you should hire professionals, when you should DIY, and who could be, if you're going to hire, who could be kind of on your team when you're doing this. I think this is a big topic for people
Oh,
that,
this is a big topic.
yeah.
So, I mean, really, it comes down to a couple of factors. Um, I don't want to put a blame sticker on it, but it is for me when I look at it. I grew up on HGTV. This is like what 16 odd some odd years ago, which
Yeah.
did fuel my
Yes.
desire to be an interior designer. I was like, oh my
Yep.
god, that creativity, that option, and I was already playing around with spaces and reconfiguring things as a teenager all the time. That for me was the natural outlet of where I was going to put my creativity. But recently, HGTV has got a lot more into the DIY sector. So people are seeing this and they're going, if they can do it, I can do it. And it's not saying you can't, but they
Mhm.
also have a massive team behind them that
Let me
I
just,
don't.
yeah, let me stop you for 1 second. Yeah, I'm not HGTV, like anything else, has its place and it's positive. It inspires all that.
Mhm.
What people don't understand, the amount of manpower they have behind the scenes, because this is a produced
Yes.
piece of
For
media.
30 minutes or like 45 minutes, right? Like
Yeah,
it's produced.
that the amount that a professional would have to hire, or you as an individual would have to hire, is really not realistic. Let me just
Yes.
say, yes.
Well, like the ones where it's like an entire house flip in a weekend, and I'm like,
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, with 2 people, not
No,
happening. You know
you
how
do
long it
need
took us
that.
to do our nursery? It was like 3 weekends worth. I'm like, it's
Yeah,
not.
and then at the end, they show you like the 50 to 100 people that came in to do this. 50 to 100, literally. So
Well,
yeah.
yeah, and then they're working day and night, right? So it's a very different reality. The problem is
Yes.
that it's not shown, right?
Yes.
So it's
Right.
not saying that you can't do it. It's just understanding what you are getting yourself involved with. And the
Right.
easiest way I can explain choosing whether or not you're going to DIY something versus if you're going to hire it out is to really understand not only your capabilities of what the financial investment actually means. So let's take a bathroom renovation for an example of retiling a space. You go and you get a quote from a tiler, and you are doing your floors and you're doing your shower. And he gives you a quote for, say, supply as well as installation of the tile that you've picked of $4,000. And you go, $4,000, that's way too much. I'm just going to do it myself. So, okay. So you're like, okay, I'm going to do it myself. What does doing it yourself actually look like? So, a couple things to consider when you're going to be DIYing. One, do you have all the tools? Do you have a tile cutter? Do you have a wet tile, which because it's a wet saw, right? And there's also a smaller dry saw for snapping them into the smaller pieces. Do you have that equipment? No, probably not. How much is it going to cost you to purchase it? That's a key factor. Can you borrow it? Is it a renting option that you can do? Look into that. How much is that going to cost you? Okay. So then do you have the skill set? Probably not. So then what are you going to need to watch and to learn and to play around with in order to get there? So it's also going to take you longer. So let's say the tiler quoted you $4,000 and he could be done in 3 days. How long is that going to take you to do? Because you work full time, I'm assuming, this hypothetical person, or they have children or whatever it might be. So you're working, you have children, you have a life. So you're not doing it for 8 hours in a day.
Uninterrupted. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So are you doing in evenings? Are you doing in weekends? And then really look at what that time availability for you is. And then what are you missing out on?
Yeah. What are you sacrificing?
Exactly. What are you sacrificing to do it? So are you not going on camping trips? Are you not spending time with your children? Are you not going out on weekends with your friends? Right. What does that look like in order to understand what that time load is?
Because time is a commodity. I want to just say to everybody, it's the most precious one.
Yes. Most precious one, especially depending on where you are in your life phase, right?
Right.
And then also, what is your intrinsic personal value? So what is your time value worth? Are you looking at it going, well, I'm probably worth, if I do this, it's about $40 an hour for me in terms of a sacrifice, and it's going to take me X amount of hours to do it, and I'm going to be losing out on all of this, and I have to buy all these additional materials and all of this different product. What does that actual lump sum look like? Maybe it's the same cost. Maybe it's actually $7,000 of what you would be sacrificing in terms of additional product, maybe having to redo work, buy things that you don't have on hand, the experience, the additional time load. How long are you going to be out of a bathroom for if you only have one? What does that look like before you jump the gun and decide $4,000 is too much? Because a lot of the time, yes, there was a peak threshold a couple of months, 2 years ago, where contractors were charging ridiculous rates because they could. There was such a demand that it was like, well, I'm just going to throw this ridiculous cost out there and see who's going to bite. But that is coming down. So it's looking at, well, is $4,000 actually reasonable when I really look at it? Or is it way out of left field? And then use that to determine whether or not it's something that you want to do.
Those are such valid points. And then how about let's talk about, once it's done, the mistake you made, how much is that to correct it?
Yes, there's that too, right?
And then you add it all up and you're more than the initial quote. That's what I always say to people, like, why wouldn't you get yourself this little, what I call insurance policy?
Yes.
It saves you time, and so it is interesting. A lot of people learn the hard way. Yeah.
And one thing I will say is that I find more and more is happening is people are less inclined to do the upfront research. And I think you've seen this a lot, is that they will pull Facebook groups for ideas of what costs would be. And that I really caution against it because it's not comparing apples to apples. I had
Ever.
someone in a Facebook group that I'm part of that asked what the cost was for average cost of linear feet for someone to install soffits, change out their existing and install soffits. And I was like, you can't ask this question. There are way too many variables that someone who is going to be pricing soffit installation for you to be able to look at a per linear cost and say that's how much it's going to be. And she's like, well, what do you mean? And I was like, okay, what is your roof pitch? How do you want it installed? Are you installing it vertically or are you installing it horizontally? Because that's two different labor conditions. What materials are you using? Do they have to bring in a genie or a boom lift? How is the access to your property? Like all of these different factors play into how someone comes and quotes your project to then know what that per linear square foot cost is. So if you're just pooling people and you're saying, how much did soffit installation cost? And someone says, oh, $35 a linear foot. And someone says $55 a linear foot. And you factor that in, and then you decide based on that you're going to proceed on the project, but you have a completely different situation, your cost is going to be more. So most companies out there will provide you with free quotes. It's not against them to come to your property, chat with you about what it is that you're wanting to do in the space, take a look at the reality of your situation, and provide you with a realistic quote. The best solution to move forward with you're looking at anything is to get 2 to 3 quotes from different contractors or different trades, and then look at them and then have them price it apples to apples. So ask them when they are breaking out that price, what's included in this? What does that labor account for? What materials or products are they bringing on in order to be able to do that project for that soffit, for example? So if they're factoring in a genie lift, are all the other companies factoring in a genie lift so that you can compare it? And then you can decide if it's something that you want to move forward with now, or you then have a number that say it's $6,000 to do and you don't have $6,000 that you can save up for.
Right.
So it's giving you that information to make those value-driven decisions rather than just like a knee-jerk reaction of I'm going to do this.
So it's like we were saying in the beginning, it's asking yourself the honest questions, because there are some people where DIY is great for them. And I will say I'm a big fan of DIY if you can do it, because, and this is on a much bigger scale, but like obviously too, if it's your first time doing a DIY, I wouldn't suggest trying it on a renovation. Like maybe you have tried your hand at some other things, but once you start to do DIY, there's definitely a lot of like confidence building it gives. There's something about working with your hands. It's all wonderful, but like, you've got to be realistic about what you said and be really honest with the time involved, the money involved, the sacrifice involved. Are you willing to take all that time in the beginning to learn from somebody else, whether it be a YouTube video, whatever? And that's all time also. And then if there is a mistake at the end and it's got to be corrected by a professional, it can be a nightmare. It could be, then you're like, oh my God, I just spent 2 or 3 times more than the initial quote. So yeah, I think you just have to be honest with yourself about that. So when you're doing these remodeling projects, what are the team members usually on it? One being the contractor, and we'll talk about when you're hiring a contractor, if you choose to do so, maybe what are some red flags, or how do you know which one is a good fit for you?
Yeah. So again, it comes down to what type of project you're doing. Jill and I are always going to say from an interior perspective, hire a designer. And I say that with so much grace and humility, not saying there and saying that it's because I am the best person in the entire world and you need to hire me because I'm going to make your project that much better. But from the sense of that, my resources, my knowledge, my ability to look at a space and instantaneously know what to do with it is going to be a time saver for you. Rather than you wasting so many hours spinning your wheels and doubt and indecision, not knowing what to do. So again, it comes down to that factor of like, where do you want to be investing your energy versus not? So interior designers in a lot of ways are much more affordable than people think. There are very expensive packages that you can get where they are fully involved, but there's also e-design services, there's consultations that still provide you the value nuggets that you're searching for, but allow you to then take that information and run with it. So then you're
Yep.
like, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I can just steamroll ahead and have a clear decision on how to make the space work versus not understanding where to start and where to go from it.
Yep.
So in any space that you're doing that involves aesthetic styling that has more of those design fundamentals, I would very much encourage bringing someone in, at least from a consultation perspective, at the very least. There's to understand really how to nail that space from the beginning, because that is your foundation. That is going to spearhead every decision that you make from that point
The space
forward.
planning, you mean? The space planning.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Space planning, the styles, the colors, the everything. And then how to piecemeal and to bring that all together. So that is number one. Depending upon your project size, you may need an architect. If you're touching anything that is structural and that is code variations and that they have to go in for building permits, you are going to need an architect, because they
and
have
maybe an
to
engineer. Yeah.
Exactly. They have to give you your drawings. They have to give you all that. Some design build firms, and a design build is where it is a construction company that either has internal teams of architects and designers that do the drawings for them, or they have specific consultants that they always work for that are work with that provide the design portion, and then they're able to work together to then build the space. It's the difference between a design build versus a design bid build, which is a different type of project. So you're always going to have someone who is doing some type of design facet for you, depending upon how large your project is. And I will say, bring that team member in way sooner than you think is going to be needed, because there are decisions that need to be made. And there's a lot of back and forth communication in terms of really nailing, again, that idea of what you need the space to be in order to make all of those other decisions. And that design process actually takes longer than people think it does.
It's a real collaboration. Like I tell people, architects have a different perspective than the interior designer. They both bring value to the table. Then the contractor and the GC, or the GC, is there to say, okay,
yes,
but that's not possible here, or yes, that's possible if we do this. So it is a real team effort. There are a lot of things to consider, which I also caution people who are going to DIY a remodel. You have to actually account for all those different perspectives. And unless you have experience, I mean, I'm a designer and I would never claim I have the perspective of an engineer, an architect, or a GC. So as a DIYer, for you to claim, well, you can have all those perspectives, I mean, okay, that's
unrealistic. Exactly, right? Like I've been in the business long enough, and I've built enough things and been on the construction side that I can go around a house and go, that's your load bearing wall.
Oh, of course.
Like, we can touch it. It's going to cost you a hell of a lot more if we want to, because then you have to reinforce your load.
Exactly.
But let's look at solutions alternative to that. Whereas 90% of the homeowner population doesn't know how to identify that. So again, on the note of DIYing, you can't take down a load bearing wall.
Right.
Like, without putting some type of structural reinforcement.
Got a big
understanding what you can and what you can't do, right?
Right.
So that's why you bring in your consultant team. And again, a lot of architects, a lot of engineers, a lot of interior designers, they will provide just straight out consultation packages for you. That's not the whole massive cost. That is me doing the entire project for you. It's me coming in and going, okay, well, you can do this. You can't do this. Here's what I suggest. And then you can then decide how to move forward from there. And that is the key thing that I would say in any project that you're taking on, is really understand what your limitations are. And if you want to go big, if you want to blow out, say, and make a massive bathroom that's take out an entire 2 separate bedrooms and make this massive bathroom and walk-in closet, what does it actually look like for you? How is your plumbing going to work? How is your electrical? What is the feasibility in that space? Because that's where that strategization comes in. Too often, and this is where I'm often brought into projects, is where people jump into an idea because they want to do something and they haven't thought through the entire process yet. And then they're left in a situation where it actually doesn't work the way I thought it was, or it's going to be way too much money. We've blown the budget already. How can we bring this back into alignment? And the way that I teach is always this back and forth between design to strategy to budget, because all three of them play such an intrinsic role with one another that it's how do we really massage all of that? So my biggest, I guess, advice would be in any project, really nail that strategy and really understand what you're trying to do in a space and what does that really look like. So bring in those consultants in different tiers to advise on what's possible and what's not possible. And that can be individual trades as well. A lot of plumbers, mechanicals, electricians, they will come in and they will just do a feasibility analysis for you. And they will say like, well, yeah, we can do this, but say your electrical panel isn't big enough in order to support what it is that you're wanting to do. So that you need to factor in, and those individual trades will provide you with that information. And then you are more loaded with, okay, if I want to do this, what is the reality of actually being able to execute it properly? And then we move into the whole design and the remassaging of the design with the budget, but really understand what that looks like. So in any project, you should be bringing in those people to consult on. And then, so that can be your individual trades. It can be your contractor. And I will always recommend a design professional of some sort, especially if you're doing things that are more structural and like architectural features, as well as physical finishes. Because the very last thing you want to do is get those hard finishes wrong, because they are very, very costly to replace. Paint.
I was going to say,
but like flooring and stuff, it's very costly to replace.
I was going to say, even with my e-service, I've helped a lot of people where they have the contractor, the space has been laid out, but they're like, I'm so lost about like what tile, what faucet. So like we'll have an e-meeting, and I'll put together, like for a kitchen, I'll pick out your faucet, your countertop, your backsplash, your flooring, maybe your lighting, and a bar stool that goes with all of it, so that you're like, okay, I get it, or a bathroom, I'll pick out the fixtures and the tile. And then they're like, okay, now I know the direction I can go in. I know what backsplash works with what counter. I know because like you said, even just that piece of it, there's so many different like nuggets of it that need assistance. So I think anywhere from DIY to a full team, you can build your team that is comfortable, for you. Having said that, if you're going to hire a contractor, you do talk about some red flags to look for, and also how to know that someone's just a good fit for you. So I wanted you to kind of run through that a little bit, because I know you talk about that quite a bit.
So it's going to vary between what sex you are. And I hate to say this, but it is very true. And I deal with it all the time whenever I bring trades in and they go and they talk to my husband, and my husband's like, why are you talking to me? She's the one who knows what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. I've had that happen too. Yeah.
So if you're a female, unfortunately, still in this world, you are going to get a lot more resistance than in terms of either mansplaining or people not necessarily giving you the right attitude and right kind of
credit,
relationship building and communication that you may be looking for. So that in itself, right off the bat, is a red flag. If you are talking to a trader or contractor and they're either rude or they're insolent, or they're just not really being very communicative with you and not really answering your questions in an appropriate manner that makes you feel comfortable, right off the bat, that is a red flag, because how they communicate with you at the beginning when they don't even have the project is a very clear sign as to how they are going to communicate with you later on down the road.
Okay.
So that's number one, is really pay attention to your gut. And I think a lot of times people are afraid to sit there and be like, well, he was really rude to me, because, we've got this resistance towards saying that maybe it was me, maybe I wasn't in the right headspace. And a lot of the time that's not the case. It's just they're not used to dealing with females. They're not used to asking or answering so many questions, whatever it might be. And do come prepared with questions, because that is how you're going to get more accurate quotes, is really understanding what that person is providing and what that means for you. And if they explain it in a certain way and you go, I'm sorry, I don't understand that, can you explain it in a different way? And they're not really willing to facilitate that request, that's another thing that you might want to be aware of. They should always be able to explain something in a very simple option that allows you the clarity to be able to make a decision. If they are only able to speak in one layer of complexity and language, then and they're unwilling to break it down so that you understand what you're actually signing off on, then that's a no-go for me.
Yeah. Okay.
Another really big red flags, if they really big one is that they're not licensed and insured. I
Yeah.
will never proceed with any trade or contractor if they are not licensed, insured, and bondable. It
Okay.
is a massive risk that you place on yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And some people think with just small little projects, say it's like switching out a couple things here and there, that it's not that big of a deal. It is. It's the same thing as like, would you drive a car without insurance? No.
Right.
That pushes the liability and the responsibility on you as the individual versus them being able to hold their own. And they
Yep.
should be able to.
Yeah.
Another one is if they place urgency on proceeding, being like, oh, well, I can do this project for you, but I need money right now. And I need to be able to know that we're buying in and I need you to sign off right now to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is a red flag because
Mm-hmm.
they can be
Oh,
honest in terms of saying, I've got a slot that where I can fit
yeah.
you in on Thursday and let me know what you think. But if they're going, I need payment right now and I need it in cash and I need to be able to say that we're moving forward right now instantaneously in order to lock me in, that
Yeah.
to me is just a dodgy contractor.
Mm, good point.
Yeah. So I mean,
Um,
there's some dodgy things that pop up, but a lot of it is just paying attention to like how you feel when you are speaking with them, because you
yeah.
will get a sense of whether or not they are someone that you can communicate with, that they understand your boundaries, that they understand how you're wanting that relationship to be built, and
Yep.
then to develop that relationship and to be able to move that forward with you. Because most projects, if you're taking on any renovation of significant scope and significant size, is a large undertaking. So you're going to be with either that trade or that contractor for a fair amount of time. You're going to
Yeah.
want to make sure that you are able to communicate properly and able to really understand each other to be able to move that project forward in a successful way.
That's really, really good advice. And I just want to say to people in general, all these projects have a lot of moving parts. And
Mm-hmm.
a lot can go wrong.
Yes.
And sometimes things do go wrong, but you can, if you have professionals on a team, they can self-correct really quickly. Um because they can hone in on the problem and get it corrected. And so that's another thing to be careful of. There's a lot of moving parts. So you want to make sure it's somebody that can really manage everything. And some designers come in and do the project management piece of it as well. So they're
Mm-hmm.
kind of like in communication with the contractor, the architect, the electricians, whatever, and managing it, because there's a lot. So we'll wrap up the conversation. We've really given so much here, and we could go on for hours. But you talk about there's some very costly mistakes that can be avoided, and where these projects can go off the rails and how to avoid that. So let's kind of combine those two maybe a little bit, just to talk about, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
they projects can go off the rails. Here's how, and here's how to kind of avoid some of those mistakes.
So the biggest one that I will say that I see over and over again, and I understand where it comes from, and it's where one of my biggest educational kind of points hones in on, is starting without a really in-depth budget and not understanding
Mm,
what your costs actually are.
yeah.
So again, this comes down to bringing in those consultants and bringing in those people to understand what your feasibility is and what that would realistically look like.
Yeah.
But then understanding how to build a successful budget and what that looks like for your project.
Yeah.
So budgets are not fun. They're complex. It's looking at money that's just going to, siphon out of your bank account. And I understand that. But the very worst thing that you can do is to start any project as a knee jerk reaction and say, this is what I'm going to do, and not understand what that snowball effect is.
Yeah.
So there's a relationship between your scope of work, which is like everything that you're going to be doing in your project, to your budget value, and then
Hmm.
understanding how you can manipulate those two to stay within your budget goal threshold. And
Okay.
that's one of the things that I actually teach, is how to create that priority list between your priority levels 1, 2, and 3 of in any project, so that when things go wrong, like you mentioned, where it is that you can pull things out
Hmm.
and can
Hmm.
say, I'm going to pin this to a later date.
Yep.
And like when I've got more money, or it's not something that needs to be done right now, it can be done in a year or two. So you're
Yeah.
still left with that like ideal situation of what your project's going to end up with,
Yeah.
because you know where you wanted to place your large chunks of money, and you knew how you wanted to divide it. And then you knew how, if things did go in wrong, where you could pull and where you could massage that project around to
Mm-hmm.
still end up in the end goal decision.
And I just want to add, I think it's important for people to understand that when you start a renovation project, the walls and floors are typically sealed.
Yep.
So my contractor will oftentimes, we will say, given like normal circumstance, everything normal, it should be this. If we take the wall down
Mhm.
and we see X, or we pull up the floor and there's X, because sometimes even in a home that isn't that old, they've taken shortcuts and like the
Oh
wiring
yeah.
is a little faulty or not to code or something. And so, just as somebody who's going to start a renovation, I think you should just know that things could come up when they open up the walls and open up the
Mhm.
floors. So you're not always getting, I mean, I'm sure there's cases where people maybe they have been swindled if they didn't have
Oh
somebody
yeah.
reputable, but things legitimately come up when walls and floors get open that you didn't expect.
Mhm.
We've definitely had some older homes where my contractor had a feeling like this was done so long ago. I have a feeling the wiring here is definitely going to need redoing. So I'm going to put that in your estimate. And if we take it down and it doesn't, then
Yeah.
then so be it. But at least ahead of time. So I think it's that preparedness of like, things can kind of crop up that you
Yeah.
don't know until you start to open everything up, right? Yeah.
1000%. And that actually touches on really working with the correct people and then understanding what they're giving you.
Yeah.
So, and this is twofold. One, the cost that a contractor gives you in any quote is not your budget.
Yeah.
There are other layers that you add to that number, which equals the amount of money that you, as the person paying for the project, needs to have available and to factor in as what your potential project costs could be. So
Okay.
if
Yeah.
I'm talking to someone and I've gone through everything and the contract's like, it's going to be $60,000 to do a kitchen,
Yep.
$60,000 is not my end cost for my kitchen. There
Mhm.
are other costs that need to be factored in. There's a contingency fund, there's a reserve fund, there's project escalation costs, there's
Mhm.
shipping and taxes. There's
Mhm.
all of these things that you need to factor in along with your hard costs that are costs that you absorb. If you've hired, say, Jill or I, we
Mhm.
are a cost that is separate to what your contractor is quoting you. That
That's
still
right.
needs to be factored into your budget because it's a cost that you have to absorb. So there's
Yep.
many different layers that get built into a budget that tells you this is how much your project's actually going to be.
Yeah.
So the biggest point from those is that a contingency fund always needs to exist.
Mhm.
And a lot of contractors will build a little bit of a buffer in. So
Yep.
understand what that might be and ask them, are you allowing any estimates or allowances? And what does
Mhm.
that look like? You can either have them pull them out separately so that you can mark down that this might be a cost, this might not be a cost. Or you can just bucket that amount in a contingency that you are holding, saying, but don't worry, you don't put it in your estimate. I will bucket it myself in a contingency like
Yeah.
percentage that is
Yep.
factoring in for these possibilities and known probabilities that might occur. And
Mhm.
your contingency should never be below 10%. A lot of
Yeah, I
people
was
look
gonna
at
ask
5,
you. Mhm.
but like, okay, realistically, if you have a $60,000 kitchen and you
Mhm.
put a 5% contingency on that, that's
Mhm.
$3,000. What is
Yeah.
$3,000 going to get you?
Not much.
Not a whole lot.
Yep. Unfortunately, but it's the truth. Yep.
No, so you need to look at it in that sense. So it's like at the very minimum, your contingency should be 10. I always say 10 to 15. And your
Mhm.
contingency is an amount of money that is factored into your budget
Mhm.
that is for known items that you have identified that have a high probability of happening. So again, this
Okay.
is conversations with your contractor. Yes, your wiring might be faulty, your plumbing might not be up to code. When we open this up and we start looking at this, we might realize that these breakers need to be replaced, or your electrical panel might need to be upgraded, but we won't
Exactly.
really know until we get into it. Or we
Right.
might find mold or asbestos. You're like, good to know. It's an old house. I'm going to factor that into my contingency amount, and I'm going to potentially put a bit of a higher amount. We
Yep.
don't know what we're dealing with yet, so they can't quote it properly, but at least I have that bucket of money accounted
Yep.
for, right?
Yep.
Your reserve fund, I label it as like your oh crap fund. It
Yep.
is your your bucket of money that you put aside that's in a separate bank account that is
Mhm.
there for things that you never could have even fathomed happening. Because
Okay.
more than 70% of the time, there will be times when things will happen in projects that you
Mhm.
never could have factored. My
There's the
parents,
unexpected, totally.
exactly, like my parents redid a kitchen and they had a suspended hood fan. They always had a center suspended hood fan. But
Okay.
this new hood fan that they put in weighed like 5 times more than the old one. So they
Yep.
had to completely like reinforce and put a new structure into the roof in order to support the weight of this suspended hood fan. Is
Yep.
that something that you would have known going right into the project? No.
Yep.
Maybe if you had done like a massive inspection of everything, but most people don't do that. So your reserve fund is there as this like extra blanket of cash that you have that
Mhm.
allows you that if these situations do come up, you can either make the decision to pull from this extra bucket and say, it's okay, I have that money accounted for because I planned for it. Or
Mhm.
you can make the decision to pull scope and action items out of your list and say, I'm going to bucket these for later. And this is where the cash is going to come from. Because your contingency in something that's that large is most likely not going to cover that amount. So then it's like, how are we going to come up with those additional funds?
I think your point is so good because honestly, I see people in this like, let me just see how I can shortcut it mode with everything. And
Yes.
if that to me, I feel like just to be really blunt, like if that's how you're taking this on, just wait. Just like
Yes.
wait till you have the money to put in these various funds like you're mentioning because it's so much more frustrating. It's so much more easier to blame the contractor or whatever when you're not prepared. And I'm not saying like the contractor doesn't make, maybe there's a situation where a contractor did make a mistake. But a lot of times it's just people's frustration because they're trying to shortcut. And
Yes.
I just want to say that because I just see it too often and it's like don't short you're shorting yourself and you're causing a lot of frustration in the end. So you do need to be prepared as we talked about in the very beginning of this conversation before you even take this on. Like do we have the proper funds to really take us through this journey?
Oh,
Right?
and when and that's the big thing. And I get it. Like, and I talk to a lot of people like, oh, but this is such a bigger process, and this is so much more planning and so much more thought into it than I ever would have thought. And the reality is, yes, it is. It is a lot more. But if you are taking on a massive remodel or even just a kitchen renovation and a kitchen project, it is a large undertaking and it's also a large financial investment. So why would you not want to spend the time up front doing your own due diligence to really understand what you're actually getting yourself involved with and then what that looks like from a financial sense? Because that also ties into the two other big like project derailments that I find is that not understanding how your contract is laid out with your contractor and not understanding
Mhm.
what options are available for you and
Mhm.
then proceeding in with the project in one certain um, direction in terms of pricing that you weren't aware of. So either if it's like time and materials or if there's like a gross upkeep to it and not talking with that contractor of what that pricing model is and what you
Mhm.
could do in order to have it priced differently. So that's the big one. And the other one is thinking that a contractor is a designer and they are not.
Yes. Neither is an
So
electrician or plumber. I'm just mentioning that because I'll go over to
yes,
your house and be like, "Well, my electrician was here and said," and I'm
and then
like,
we should do this. And you're like,
"Yeah."
okay. And the reason I say this is, okay, I've worked on two separate projects that I've been brought in order to try to bring them back into alignment. And one, the project was priced, it was an entire house build. The project was priced very loosely based on very loose drawings, and not a lot of things were detailed in it. And then the client thought, well, I've got these drawing sets, the contractor's priced it, this is how much it's going to be, we're good to go. But nothing was actually picked in terms of
Mm.
any of the finishes, any of the materials.
Yep.
Nothing was actually detailed in terms of all these connection points between materials. So it's like, for instance, the exterior stairs. How do you want that railing done? What does it look like? How is that railing going to connect to these large structural beams? How is that stair tread going to happen? What is your risers look like? What is that nosing going to be? How is that entire design going to connect to your railing of your actual handrail? None of that was figured out. So then, one, how is he pricing it? And then two, it's like, oh, well, the contractor will just figure it out. Well, the contractor needs to know what it is that you're wanting that to look like, not only from a pricing, but from a building perspective. So a contractor is not a designer. So if more work had been done upfront with the design team to actually nail down all these details along with the specific sourcing and selecting of the materials, it could have been priced more accurately.
Right.
And then it could have been built more quickly. And
Yeah.
then they would have been able to have actually landed on something that they really loved, rather than throughout the entire process of the build, cutting and making all of these design decisions as the house was being built to bring down this project cost value that kept on increasing and increasing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that happens more often than I would like to say in reality. And the other project that I was brought into is a kitchen. And it's a lot of the time, I think people proceed in this way with kitchens, is that they bring on a kitchen designer, they get drawings done, they haven't actually figured out what they want the kitchen to look like, they haven't picked anything, they haven't made selections for any of the appliances, the plumbing, the lighting, the anything. And then they get this design and they fall in love with it, and then they start making all these design decisions, but now the design doesn't work. So it's like the appliances that they've picked don't fit where it is that they thought they could go. So then the design needs to be changed. And then they're making all these sacrifices going, well, now I don't like the design. Well, you already bought the appliances. So now we kind of, it's like, it's backwards. So design in itself is a lot more of a massaging and a give and take in terms of what can we do here. Now we're going to make some decisions, and then we're going to go back and we're going to manipulate it this way.
Right.
And then,
it's
that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Exactly. Right. So that doesn't work. Now let's massage the thought process over here and maybe pick a different fridge, whatever it might be, where there's this misconception that it's like, this happens, this happens, this happens. And then it's like this sequential process. And there are steps to it, but they're more fluid and they more happen in tandem. And if you don't know what those steps are, and then how to move through them in a very fluid sense of about how they inform one another, that is where you're going to end up in these situations where you engage teams, you proceed with their project, you do rough-ins on your kitchen that doesn't actually work with what your final decision needs to be, because you haven't got that far yet.
Yeah, it's really, I think the message is planning, planning, planning. And it's funny because like my first freebie, and the freebie that I still have, it's called a room planner, because even for decorating, it's like, what questions do you need to ask yourself? And then I give people sort of like some budget ideas, because if they don't even know where to start. And like I just said before about, if you don't have the funds now, then at least you know what to work toward. And you can be like, okay, we're not going to dig into this till we can have that contingency fund, because we don't want to be in a pickle. So we're going to wait X amount of time till we can save a little bit more and set it aside. Having that knowledge, I mean, so it's like knowledge allows you to plan. And then when you go in with kind of eyes wide open, you know, it doesn't mean you're going to avoid every single pitfall, but you're going to be so much more prepared to bounce back, handle it, feel less frustrated, feel less inconvenienced, because your life is very inconvenienced by remodels too.
Yes.
So,
definitely.
You know, it's all, you are just such a wealth of information. I mean, we could go on for hours, but I think your approach is so, you know, great. And I think it is such an important topic to relay to the audience, because I know the audience gets frustrated, and rightfully so. This is a lot to take on. And so I hope that our conversation helps give some tidbits and advice, and impart some information, so they can just feel more equipped to do this, and less, and also just really kind of debunk that whole trying to find the cheapest contractor, trying to shortcut. It's like anything else in life. When you try to shortcut too much, it's not going to benefit you. Right.
Oh, 1000%. And I mean, like, no one's perfect. I've been in situations where I've been like, I just need this getting done, and I'm just going to hire this person, and have not gone through a whole vetting process and ended up regretting it later on down the road. So, I mean, like, we're not sitting here and saying we ourselves are perfect. We've obviously gone through our own mistakes, but we've also learned from it, and we know what it is that needs to happen in order to make those spaces come to life. And my biggest, I guess, wish is not to sit here and say that, like, you need to hire me to do whatever it is that I do best. It's to give you the information and the tools so that you can make those decisions so much more easily and effectively. Because I have I get people emailing me, I get people messaging me, I'm on message boards, and I see all of these same mistakes and all of these issues continuously come up. And I'm like,
over and over, right?
It's always the same thing. I'm like, this could be so easily resolved if you had just gone through it in a different way of approaching it. And I
Yep.
100% know that it's because that's not taught. And that's
Yep.
where I'm really hoping that I can fill that void of being like, let's look at it from a different way. I know it's not the fun, sexy way. I get that. We will get to the sexy design part. But first, we need to really understand what we're doing. And then
Yep.
we build on that. And then we get something that we know how to proceed with, even with
Yep.
styling. Like for the packages that you have, it's giving them an idea, it's giving them an intention and a budget, and they go, okay, I know where to start. Doesn't mean that they have to move forward right away. No,
Yep.
but they can also piecemeal from that. They can
Yep.
go, okay, I'm going to do this now. I have a plan. I
Yep.
know what I'm working towards. I'm going to do this now. I'm going to save up some money. I'm going to do this later. And I'm going to layer these things on as I go through it. Not everything needs to be instantaneous, but it's
Yep.
really understanding what we're trying to go for. So the decisions you're making up front are able to actually be used later on rather than rework.
Yeah, and it's like you just said, for me, it is a much bigger message than um we use ourselves as examples because that's what we know, but it's a much bigger message. A lot of times I'll put messaging out there about hiring a designer and I'll say, not even if you hire me, just like knowing that in the profession there are people that can help you instead of going on your own and making a mistake that's more money than if you had paid for a service locally with me or not with me. It's really to just educate people and help people,
Oh,
whether
yeah.
they use me or not. You know what I mean? I really, really feel that way. It's because I'm here to, my message is much bigger than that. And that's why I have the podcast. It's not just about me. It's about bringing on experts like yourself, where we can show people, where they can benefit from having a professional who's seasoned, the difference that makes. So,
Yes.
yeah.
And I think that's really like the end kind of
That's the
message
end game.
the end message is like, I think there's this weird stigma against professionals of being like, oh, well, they're going to cost way too much and I don't want to
Yeah.
bring them on because they're just going to be way too much. And I get that. And again, depending upon what stream you're bringing them into your project, they could very much be, but
Yeah.
there's always people in different lanes as well as different ways of working with different people that will give you the information that you're needing. And then you can take that and then you can run with it as you please. But it's better to have some type of information and to work with some layer of professional in any type of project to gain that fundamental information and direction in terms of this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, this is what I would advise on. This is the directions that I would lean you towards. So then you're set up rather than just continuously spinning your wheels.
Yeah, or crowdsourcing for days and getting 95 different answers.
Yes,
and you're
that
like,
are
well,
all based on opinion.
that are based on opinion, and like sometimes there's misinformation.
Mhm.
And like there was even a travel Facebook group that I'm in, because we're taking a trip, and somebody wrote something about a region, and then like 50 other people were in there like, that's not even accurate. Why would you say that? And so you have to be really careful.
Yep.
It's not just home. It can happen anywhere, but with home design, like don't put all your eggs in your basket there of like, oh, I got my information from this group. And again, there's great information in those groups too. All of these things are tools, but knowing how to use them and not 100% rely on them is sort of the key.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like investment banking, like would you pool a giant Facebook group full of people being like, I want to make some investments and I want to understand my mortgage, or would you go talk to a professional? You'd probably pay a couple $100 for a consult to talk to someone to give you the right direction because it's money. So if we take that idea and we put that into our home projects, of in the end, it's money and it's also your intrinsic value of your time, and we put that into it and we say, what is that worth for you? It opens up a different way of looking at it and being like, okay, well, yes, I would like to know more of what it is that I'm going to be investing in, because it's an investment in your home versus just jumping the gun and like seeing what sticks, and figuring it out as I go along. So there's different ways of looking at it. And that's, I would really encourage people to rather than the spaghetti on the wall is let's make it an intentional idea and figure out who we can work with and who we can lean on to get the information that we need to be able to proceed more effectively.
Yeah, because I say to people all the time, when's the last time you spent thousands and tens of thousands of dollars and didn't do your research? Like when you bought your home, when you bought your car. I mean, people sometimes even do more research about their computer. And so it's like you're about to spend a ton of money investing, and it's probably going to increase your home value too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, don't you want to be kind of more smart about that?
Yep.
So anyway, I mean, we have
We
talked
can
about
go on forever.
yeah, we could. If there's any last sort of tidbit you want to leave with the audience, let me know. And then I would love to close the show by having you let everybody know where we can find you. You also have some great freebies yourself and services, and we would love to link those all in the show notes for you. So I'll let you take it away with that.
Yes. My ending note would be design is super fun. It is super exciting. It is a way of adding your own personality, your own flair to your home. And the way to really get it so that it speaks to you and it works from you from a longevity standpoint is to really understand what you're wanting the space to be. And the only way to really understand that is to dive deeper into yourself, to how it works, and to nail that strategy thought process before you go into the image sourcing. It can happen in tandem, but a lot of the time it gets a little flooded. So really think about that first and then go into the creative process, because it will make your life so much easier. Just so much easier.
That's a good note to leave on.
Of resources, I have a couple. I do have a limited series podcast that is out, which is on nursery design, how to design a baby nursery. So if you're like me, can't really see right now, but I'm 30, almost 36 weeks pregnant. So if you're like me and you're expecting a little one and you want to know how to take all that overwhelm off your shoulders as a new mom and to create that space, I've got that limited series podcast out. I also have a YouTube channel, which is filled with a whole bunch of different resources on design, as well as building the space of remodeling the home of your dreams. And that's just under Gabriella Milgrom. And I have a free design challenge that's coming up, and that can be found on my website, which is gabriellamilgrom.co.
That's awesome. Thank you again so much for being here. This has been a pleasure. You're so knowledgeable, and I really thank you for educating me and the whole audience today. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. I love your show. It's amazing, and I'm so glad to be a guest.
Thank you, and we'll chat soon.
Yes, thank you.
Take care, and good luck with the baby. Bye.